we're going to need to take a couple of minutes, I think, to because there's a few of them and we're going to need to figure out what we want to do in order. So, City Clerk, can we please have a roll call?
Cumby.
Here.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty. Schmeckel.
Here, but I just heard.
Schuster.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 9 present and 0 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, folks, let's just take a look at the special meeting agenda.
Mayor,
Yeah.
would you like me to go ahead and read the notice for today?
Oh, of course, please. Yep. Getting ahead of myself because I'm stressed about getting the assignments done. Go ahead, City Clerk.
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022 at 6:00 p.m. via Zoom meeting ID number 827-4895-7006, passcode 768036 for the following purpose. Number 1, Indian Heights First Edition Final Plat. Number 2, Original Ordinance Number 2048, vacating approximately 29,500 square foot area of right-of-way on Lewis Street between 14th Street and 15th Street. Third and final reading, introduced by Pierce. Number 3, quitclaim deed conveying lands vacated by Original Ordinance Number 2048 to University of Wyoming. Number 4, Resolution 2022-52, authorizing installation of a bus stop and school zone, removal of parking and striping of 1400 block of Lewis Street, which I think we figured out is actually Bradley Street. Number 5, University of Wyoming and the City of Laramie cooperation letter. And number 6, consideration of Resolution 2022-53, appointing a council member to the community interview panel.
Thank you, City Clerk. All right, we've had the call to order and the notice of the special meeting. Now, you can see that we've got a couple of these that we're going to need to order out. And we just need to know what we're doing because some of them are going to have some, I think, sub-motions or additional motions. Councilmember Somerville, do you have a suggestion for how you want to, I think you did based on an email that I saw from you. So why don't you go ahead and line that out for us?
Mr. Mayor, with your approval, I'd like to recommend moving item 1G and making that item 1D little a, so that we will consider the resolution of the bus stop. And my apologies, that is supposed to be the 1400 block of Bradley Street, not Lewis Street. That we'll consider that before the vacation.
And we'll just make sure that that proper street name is addressed in the motion and the record will reflect that. Are there any other changes that we need? We don't have a pre-meeting for special meeting, council members, and sometimes that's not a good idea. So essentially we're having to do this now. Vice Mayor, yes, City Clerk.
Oh, I apologize, Mayor. You might have been proceeding right into it. I was just going to ask if you could have a motion and a second to set that.
Yeah, that's indeed what I was doing. I just want to make sure that we're good on the rest of the agenda items as they stand. And I think so. I think that was the change that we needed to address, right, Council Member Somerville? Was there anything else?
No, Mayor, that's the other one.
Vice Mayor, do you want to just go ahead as per tradition and go ahead and make the motion for the agenda to be set?
Sure. I move that item 1G be moved to item 1DA, and Yeah, I move that the items be moved.
Okay,
Again,
there's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand at both.
Aye.
All right,
I think
that
we need a
motion
voice.
carries.
Do we need a voice vote?
I'm not sure. I would defer to the city clerk on that. City clerk, do we need a voice vote?
We just needed a majority vote, so if we came to the conclusion that the voice vote and raised hands reaches majority, then we're okay.
And we should distinguish between voice vote and roll call. They're both voice votes, but go ahead, Vice Mayor. Did you have a question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I thought I saw your hand. I'm sorry. Councilor Doherty, did I see a hand?
I was responding if you needed a point of information. Do we need now to vote on the agenda as changed?
I don't think so. I think we just changed the agenda. City clerk?
Yeah, it is slightly different than how we proceed in regular meeting. So you're right, Councilor Doherty. Normally in regular meetings, we do set the agenda after we change it, but in this case, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. So, who's going to do what? Council members, who wants to introduce? Councilmember Somerville, I think you're going to be introducing the item that you had to change for. Now I've got to go back. Yep, Councilmember Schuster, I see you.
Yes, I've been the one that actually moved the motion to bring the Lewis Street thing back online, and I introduced it last meeting. So I think I'm probably the one that's supposed to keep it going.
Okay, so that's Councilmember Schuster for 1E. Who wants to do 1D? Councilmember Harrington, thank you. One F. Councilmember Schmeckel. 1G. Councilmember Somerville.
yep, that'll be the new 1DA.
1DA. Okay. So that's actually going to follow Councilmember Schuster's motion. All right. So then 1H is also going to be you, Councilmember Somerville.
Got it.
And then we will have a consideration of resolution. Who wants to introduce 1I? Can I get a council member to do that? Somebody that hasn't signed. Councilmember Cumby, can you do 1I? All right, thank you. And that'll take us through that special meeting agenda, action-packed as it is, and into the work session. Thank you. All right, we have public comment on non-agenda items. And the city clerk had informed me we had a member of the public sign up to make a public comment on a non-agenda item ahead of time. City clerk, so if we have that member of the public with us, recognize them, and we'll give Mr. Matamore the floor.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, thank you for the time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I understand the need for a revenue stream for improvement and rehab of infrastructure and other development needs in the city. However, I would like to speak against an urban renewal agency, especially funded by a tax incentive bonds, which is a path paved with failure. Since 1949, URAs have destroyed neighborhoods, small businesses across the nation. Studies by Harvard, Princeton, other institutions, Minnesota has had some out, have concluded that while well-intentioned, they've done more harm than good, particularly to poor people, and have seriously hindered racial diversity. And many studies now just out and out call it racist. I hate that word because it's tossed around too much. It all depends on the people running it mostly. Historically, though, TIF funding has frozen property taxes to the higher authority, to the county authorities, from large swaths of an area. So if you were to take the area declared blighted in the study on 3rd Street and 4th Street rather, you could freeze property values as far as 7th or 8th, and in some respects on the north side of the park, you could freeze property values as far north as far east as 9th Street. This can place a heavy burden on school systems and other authorities that use this property tax money to fund their day-to-day activities and can increase other taxes in the future. Another method, URAs can also impose assessments, which in the case of the west side and South 2nd Street, if the assessments are severe enough and are full price assessments for some of the stuff outlined in the study, you could cause abandoned properties. People just can't afford them, so they end up walking away from their homes and businesses, which will have a counter effect of what you want and actually decrease property values and make any kind of development there even harder. In addition, while currently the city has no need to utilize the 5-mile extraterritorial zone that is authorized in 15-9, I think 124, it will be there. It's in existence. So if you adopt the entire section 15-9, 100 through 137 for your URA, you will have that authority. All right. That will be a major item of contention in the future between the county and the city. And I don't know, we really need to go down that road. While the city has the power to use eminent domain as it sees fit, using it for the purpose of just raising taxes is going to spark intense debate and political fights that I don't know if we need. And I suggest what we do is we wait for the growth plan study, which is in the process now, if needed, and we need to stand up a URA, and stand it up for one project at a time, fund it, pay it off, and then sunset it and get rid of it. I think.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore. We've hit your time here, but I want to thank you for your research points here, and you can reach out to us some more about this, and help us get a better understanding of your position. But I appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have any other public comment on non-agenda items? All right. Well, we're going to move on now, and that's going to take us into the first item on the special meeting agenda, item number 1D. Go ahead. I can't remember who said they were going to do it. Councilmember Harrington? No? 1D? Item number 1D, who's introducing it? No, nobody remembers?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, no, Mr. Mayor, that's me. Sorry, I was having a hard time getting off mute.
Okay, I thought it was you, but I couldn't remember. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just winning at technology over here. All right, Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the Indian Heights First Edition final plat based on findings of fact and conclusions of law, acknowledge receipt of the financial security and subdivision security, and improvement deferral acknowledgement form, park and lieu fee, and emergency access maintenance agreement, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the plat.
Second.
There's a motion and a second from Vice Mayor Pierce. Thank you very much. We've got Mr. Cheney from Planning. Mr. Cheney, over to you.
Yep, Mayor, Council, this is a final plat that, as you may have seen on your last meeting, was on your consent agenda and was pulled just we weren't able to secure financial security prior to the meeting. And so we took advantage of having this special meeting and got this on this agenda so that the applicant could continue working and get moving on the subdivision. I'm going to keep it brief. This is the first edition of the Indian Heights final plat. You saw the preliminary plat about 8 months ago or so. As noted in the motion, We have our typical subdivision agreement associated with it, park and lieu fee. We have an emergency access agreement for a fire access, secondary access road into the subdivision. And this is a 16-lot, single-family residential subdivision, kind of in the northeastern corner of the community. You have the installation of a couple new roads, as well as city infrastructure, water, sewer, and stormwater in the area. And so this is a very standard project. It's only on tonight because we just needed a little bit more time to get things all buttoned up before the meeting. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I did see it looks like the applicant is available on as an attendee. If you have any questions for him as well, probably.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead with any questions for Mr. Tini on this project? If you have them, council, if you have them. If you don't, you don't. Yes, Councilmember O'Doord.
I had trouble figuring out the aquifer protection area resolution. So would you mind walking us through that? Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, Council. So this is located within the APOZ zone. And so through when we have a subdivision that's located in one of those areas, there is a site-specific investigation completed for the property and for the proposal. In this case, that was done. And it was then this kind of the second part of that is we complete a peer review done by kind of a second party to ensure that the material and findings of that report are found and correct. And so for this project, there were no issues noted related to the aquifer protection overlay zone in this residential subdivision. And so you don't see any specific things that were included as part of the preliminary plat and the final plat. So.
Thank you.
Any follow-up to that or any other questions for Mr. Tini on this plan? Okay. Why don't we see if there's any public comment on this item? Seeing none, back to you, Council, for any final thoughts you might have on the Indian Heights First Edition final plats. It's been a little bit of time in coming. Is that you, Councilmember Gabriel?
Yeah, just briefly, thanks, Mayor. Derek, I know this is the first part of some expansion for housing that Laramie desperately needs. Can you remind me of the potential in that area in the years to come?
Mayor, Council, so this preliminary plat has 31 residential lots associated with it. So this kind of knocks out about half of those lots. The preliminary plat here is a smaller area of kind of a larger undeveloped area located in that northeastern portion of town. So it doesn't encompass all the undeveloped land. So that's all also part of the potential area that could be developed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tini. Thanks for the question, Councilmember Gabriel. It's good to kind of put it in the big housing perspective, one piece at a time. Any other questions for Mr. Tini right now? Why don't we go to a vote? Roll call vote, please, City Clerk.
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 no's, Your Honor.
Okay, that motion carries. Thank you, City Council. Thank you, City Clerk. It's going to take us to item number 1E. It's going to be introduced by Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you very much.
Point of order.
Wait a second. Wait a second. I must have missed something here. Go ahead. Who needs to tell me what I need to do?
We changed the agenda to include item number 1DA, the resolution first.
Right. Sorry. It's 1DA, right. Councilmember Somerville, my goodness, after all the time we spent on it, it still didn't do me any good. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve Resolution 2022-52, contingent upon the passage of Original Ordinance 2048, authoring installation of a bus stop and school zone, removal of parking and striping of the 1400 block of Bradley Street, and amend the title to the same, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Second.
The motion and a second from Councilmember Harrington. My apologies, Councilmember Schuster, for losing the order. Councilmember Somerville, over to you, or do you want to go to staff or anyone else for background? This is mostly a background provided by you, I believe.
Mayor, thank you. I'll be pretty brief in the background. We've talked about this quite extensively. So this resolution formalizes action on the part of the city regarding several items that we talked about at length last week. As you can tell by the title, it would allow the city to direct city staff to install the bus loading zone and appropriate signage for that, as the school has indicated they need. It would also install a school zone north of the lab school, make sure that's appropriate. There is some 20-mile-an-hour speed limit zones signs up there, but it seems like it may need some additional signage in that area. One of the bigger items is that would install striping per the traffic impact study that was done on the 1400 block of Bradley Street. That would also, we would also require the removal of parking on both the north and south sides of that street. I will just pause there and say that the University of Wyoming does own the property on both the north side and the south side of that block. It gives authorization to amend the budget to pay for additional signage as needed for the school zones, and then requires the restriping of the 15th Street and Lewis Street intersection to take out the left-hand turn lane and establish that two-directional travel on 15th Street. Mayor, with that, we've talked about this extensively. This is all things that was discussed with the university as well as the school there, and I would stand for any questions.
Appreciate that, Councilor Somerville. Thanks for keeping it concise. Do we have anyone from planning or city staff in general that wants to add anything to Councilmember Somerville's kind of summary there? Mr. Gabatuller, thanks for being here. Welcome back.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of council. Just to add a bit, which I'll explain in our third reading as well, which is coming up. Just to add that the conditions from the Planning Commission report that Councilmember Somerville drew one of the conditions for in her resolution is part of the council motion this evening, but I'll be getting to that later, and I don't have anything else to add.
No, I appreciate you touching on that. Thank you, Mr. Gabatuller. Okay. Yes, discussion. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just want to be clear on what part of our resolution it should say Bradley, because in some places the Lewis part is correct, because it's the vacation of the 1400 block of Lewis. But the striping is for Bradley Street. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilor O'Doherty. I sincerely apologize for my typo on the resolution itself. So the title should refer to Bradley Street. The removal of parking and striping on the 1400 block should refer to Bradley Street, and then all of the other mentions of Lewis Street are correct.
So I think we're probably going to need to do that as a, yes, Councilmember O'Doherty, point of information.
No, because the second whereas says, whereas the vacation of the 1400 block of Lewis Street. So not all of the Lewis streets need to be changed to Bradley.
Right.
City Clerk.
Mayor, if we could just have a formal motion to amend the resolution.
Yeah, I believe we're going to need to get an amendment at this point, if it's not simply just a change from one to the other. All right. So, Councilmember Somerville, do you think do we know where we need to be?
Mayor, actually, so in my original motion, I amended the title to the Bradley Street, and I believe everything else is correct within the resolution. The second whereas the vacation of 1400 block of Lewis Street, that's referring Oh my gosh, that's not correct. No, that is correct. Sorry. That is referring to the next item that we're considering. It's just stating in the resolution that that vacation is necessary, which is why we're considering all of these things. I'm double checking.
Please take your time. Let's make sure.
Yep.
Let's make sure. While you're looking, I'm going to go to Councilmember Authority to help us.
Section 5, that's where you're talking about the turn lanes. Is that correct?
Mayor, that is correct in section 5. Removing the left and right turn lane on 15th Street at 15th Street and Lewis Street intersection. That is correct.
Council, are we satisfied with the motion as it stands? Just to take a few minutes, probably worth making sure that we get our ducks in a row. All right, very well. Any other questions or discussion about this? As Councilmember mentioned, it does follow a lot of discussion in previous meetings. So we'll go to some public comment if there. Yes, Councilmember Schuster.
That is really going to change the looks of 15th because you had a turn lane and a regular lane. So going down 15th when Lewis closed, you're going to have 2 lanes going up to the stoplight. And then coming north, they had a merge because you had a turn only lane. So this is really going to take some sorting out and striping when all this happens, because it is really going to change the complexity with that intersection gaining 2 more lanes. So that really needs to be looked at in detail. Since we're doing this and talking about removing it, we better figure out how we're going to have everybody load. Now, heading south, that's no big thing. If you want in that lane next to the where the proposed dorms are going to come up, that's fine, because the other will be a turn lane, and that'll be really used on the sporting event nights. So, but that really needs to be looked at. We're changing one thing and creating one heck of probably a mess when we do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Let me just say I do not disagree with this setting us up for some messy times. You know, we all need to acknowledge that. I believe that's right. And I'll also say, Councilmember Schuster, I agree with you. It'll be particularly interesting on sporting event evenings. Basketball games come to mind. Any other discussion?
Mayor, I'm having a rough time following Councilor Schuster.
With the audio?
Yes.
Yes. Councilmember Schuster, I don't know what's going on, but your audio was pretty cloudy. Councilmember Gabriel, I tuned in pretty keenly there to try to catch all the words, and if I could, I just summarize. Councilmember Schuster's talking about how the current configuration of that is already pretty interesting, with 1 lane turning into a turning lane only as you reach right where this intersection comes in. And now we're adding some interesting new dynamics with this plan, which are going to be really fun during athletics events, is pretty much what he said. Councilmember Schuster, try out your audio.
Okay, I just saw the thing come up and screens across there, and so hopefully they've made an improvement. I moved the mic closer when I speak now because they told me I needed to, so hopefully we're good.
Yeah, it's a little echoey, but not bad. Councilmember Gabriel, are you still struggling? Yeah, well, tech problems. We'll do what we can.
Old age, I think.
I don't know. Any other discussion on this? Why don't we see if there's public comment? No public comment. We'll go back here. Council, anything else? I'm going to move to it. Yes, Councilmember Somerville, thank you.
Mayor, thanks. I just want to say I don't disagree with Councilor Schuster at all. There's definitely some changes coming on 15th, but we really need to remove the left turn lane onto Lewis Street and get that straightened out. I don't disagree with him, but it seems like a necessity.
Thank you. Council, I'm prepared to call for a vote unless I see your last minute hands popping up here. All right. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote on this?
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. Council, that motion carries. It's going to take us now to item number 1E, which will be Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you very much. The original ordinance number 2048 vacating approximately a 29,500 square foot area of the right-of-way on Lewis Street between 14th Street and 15th Street. I move to approve original ordinance number 2048 on third and final reading, vacating approximately 29,500 square foot area of the right-of-way on Lewis Street between 14th and 15th Streets as recommended by the Planning Commission based on findings and facts, conclusions of law, authorize the mayor and city clerk to sign the ordinance.
Second.
The motion and a second from Vice Mayor Pierce. Okay, for the background on the item, I believe we're going to go to Mr. Gabatula.
Yes, Honorable Mayor, members of council, in your cover sheet this evening, I will only note what has changed from the second reading that we had last Wednesday evening. I've added to the cover sheet the traffic flow map that was supplied by the university on August 16th. And I've also included the lone public comment that we've received that was written in regards to the vacation. Other than that, Honorable Mayor, I'd welcome Mr. Farstead and Mr. Newman to be invited to be panelists and for you to give them an opportunity to field any additional questions on third reading. But with that, I will just turn it right back over to you.
Thank you very much. And yes, let's have Mr. Farstead and Mr. Newman join us. Welcome back to the both of you. And I'd like to give you an opportunity now to review anything or add anything to the discussion so far about where we're at. Keeping in mind, of course, we're picking up off where we were last week and then a little bit prior to that. Mr. Farstead, you've got the camera on first, so it's you.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, I have nothing to contribute. Thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you for your efforts and time as well, Mr. Farstead. Mr. Newman, if you don't turn your camera on, I'll just take that as you're hanging out. You don't have anything to add. If you do turn, I'll call on. Any discussion, council? Yes, Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. When we brought this up the first time, there was a lot of controversy. And it was recommended and approved to delay it to clear into the middle of September. And some friends talked to me and said, well, we're not really super happy about it, but everything they're doing is legal. So I was the one that brought it back up. And now after I see on negotiations on other things for this new building, that they're not going that great, and I'm going to talk about 15th. Probably shouldn't, it's unrelated to this, but I am so disappointed in the plans that's already been put out for bid to change 15th into a smaller street that does not make the city's needs. So I am sorry I brought this back up. I should have left it go till the middle of next month because people are not negotiating in good faith. I met with the governor 2 months ago, talked about some problems we have, and the governor even said UW needs to become a better citizen of Laramie. It's not happened. So I'm sure this is going to go through tonight, but I'm sure there's going to be more problems coming down the road because they've already put 15th out to their design, not the city of Laramie's design, and it's an extreme disappointment to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Other comments, feedback, or input at this time on this item? Councilmember O'Doyle.
The way I read this, it's not really about 15th Street. It's about the vacation of Lewis Street between 14th and 15th. I think that other battle is somewhere else, not here. Thank you.
Other comments? public comment? Public comment is open. Seeing none. Close the public comment period. Return it back to the council. Councilmember Schmeck.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that my objections to this early on were related to the lack of communication that we were seeing towards the community. And I do want to recognize and thank UW for the efforts they have made in this space. I feel that there's room for improvement in the future, but I hope that this sets a path where we can start to include public comment and planning for how we're going to inform the public in future decisions like this, especially when we know we're going to have contentious things coming up. But I do appreciate their efforts.
Thank you, Councilmember Schmeckle. Let me just state I agree with all three previous speakers. Communication needs to be upped. Partnership needs to be improved. But this is about the vacation, which we have committed to in a 8-year-old MOU. Although I do think it sets us up for some concerns down the road. Those are my thoughts as well. If we're ready for a vote, council. All right, City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
That motion carries. Thank you, City Clerk. Council, that's going to take us now to, I think we're back to regular agenda order, so I'd be going to F now. Is that correct, City Clerk? Help me out. Yep, Councilmember Schmeckle.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the quitclaim deed conveying an approximately 29,500 square foot area of right-of-way on Lewis Street between 14th and 15th Streets, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the quitclaim deeds and authorize the clerk to record the quitclaim deeds with the Albany County Clerk.
Second.
Motion and a second by Councilmember Somerville that time. Mr. Gabatuller for background, although I understand this is more or less just a perfunctory thing related to the previous motion. If you have anything you want to let us know, please do.
Honorable Mayor, members of council, that is correct. This is a perfunctory item associated with the vacation, very similar to what was done in the vacation process of Lewis Street last year and any other vacation that the city does.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Gabatuller? Why don't we see if there's public comment on the item? No public comment. Council members, last chance for speaking on this item before the vote. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That motion carries. Council, thank you. That's going to take us to item number 1H. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the letter of cooperation between the University of Wyoming and the City of Laramie and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Second.
Second from Councilmember Harrington. Thank you. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. This is kind of I want to be clear, an informal kind of last step, memorializing some of the conversations that were had between the stakeholder groups. Now, this letter only really includes the City of Laramie and the university, both responding to concerns that were brought up by the vacation of Lewis that was just completed. And I guess I want to be clear and certainly defer to the city attorney, but this letter has no legal enforceability. It is really just a statement of goodwill, kind of a memorializing of the things that were discussed that will be done. Several of these were in the resolution that was just approved, including the school bus zone and the restriping, and the 20-mile-per-hour school zone. Two things I want to highlight. The university has agreed to sign 2 parking spots for 30-minute lab school parent visitor pickup. And then the other one is revolving around the crosswalk on the west side of 14th and Lewis Street, where the university has volunteered to go ahead and install some thermoplastic material, the shiny, durable stuff that doesn't wear down in the winter. And then our Public Works Department said they prefer to take over and maintain it from them. So in terms of just some of the comments in the conversation that I agree with in terms of communication and cooperation and partnership, I hope this letter takes a step towards that, and maybe we can get these types of conversations earlier in the process. And I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Councilmember Somerville on the letter content or anything that she outlined for us here? Mr. Farstad, since you're still with us, I know you've been kind of part of working up some of the items in this list here. And I'm just going to ask you to just sort of reiterate, we don't anticipate any trouble following through on these commitments in the letter, right? Anything else you'd like to add? Once again, we appreciate your cooperation and work with us on all these things.
Honorable Mayor, City Council, been a pleasure putting it all together. We got most of that resolution already handled, scheduled, funded, POs are issued. It's all good.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Webb, since we had a little mention about some of the items being handled by your department, I'll just give you an opportunity to say anything to us if you'd like to on this topic in terms of what you anticipate or any concerns you might have.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, no concerns from Public Works. We worked through this with Sam and the university, as well as Councilor Somerville, and we're good with where we're at.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and the department's time on helping figure out a list and a solution here for this. Thank you very much. Councilmember O'Doherty, was that your hand up?
Yeah, I just have a comment. Thank you. I appreciate the work that Councilor Somerville and our staff and UW staff has put in to this. So thank you. That's all I want to say.
Absolutely appropriate. Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. I think if we could rewind the tape, although nobody knows what that means anymore, maybe some of you here know what rewind the tape means. We might try to get some of this stuff done earlier to avoid a bunch of postponements and scrambling around, which speaks to some points that we made earlier in the discussion. Probably the sooner we can get together and see what's really happening and address those concerns. On the other hand, we did have a couple of things that we couldn't help. We had a principal changing over that needed probably to have a seat at the table, and a few other scheduling arrangement related items that were beyond our control. It does happen. I also want to thank everyone for the last minute work on it, and express hope that we can, keep improving how our process functions around these kinds of changes with the university and Laramie, because we're going to need to. We're going to need to. That's not going to go away. Are we ready for a roll call vote on this? Okay, is everybody clear that this is sort of just the, this letter is more or less just kind of a informal agreement that we're memorializing through a motion? You're clear on that? It can't really be something that we can say, hey, you didn't do this. Fortunately, as Mr. Farstad pointed out, much of it has already been addressed through items in the resolution. Okay, sounds like everybody knows what we're talking about. Yes, City Clerk, please.
Mayor, I don't believe that we've done public comments on this item yet.
I thought we had, but thank you very much, City Clerk. Is there any public comment on this item? I think you're right, and I'm wrong about having called for it. It's just, it's part 3 of almost the same item. One loses track, City Clerk. Doesn't appear that we have any public comment on the item. Thank you very much. So I think now we'll go ahead and go to the roll call vote.
Cumbie.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Schmeckel.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 no's, Your Honor.
That motion carries. Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you, Council. Let's go now to our next item. Item number 1I, Councilmember Cumby?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering, do I take nominations first so that there's a name in there, or?
I think you can read the city clerk.
Sorry, Mayor, you were headed in I think the same direction. If we read it by title to introduce the item, then you could have a short conversation about what direction, who you would like to nominate, and then you can make the formal motion.
Absolutely. So go ahead and just bring the motion forward, right, Councilmember Cumby? And then we'll go to nominations.
Okay.
Does that?
If we just introduce it by title, Mayor.
Yeah. Okay. So just, I guess, Councilmember Cumby, what you need to do is just introduce it, read the title, and then we'll get a motion, and then you can finish the motion.
Okay. So then, title, consideration of resolution 2022-53, appointing a council member to the community interview panel.
Thank you. And I do think that's the way we had to do it, because the council member still has to bring it forward to bring it on the floor for discussion.
Okay.
All right, so city manager, would you like to give us a little bit of background here, and then maybe we'll go to the council nominations or discussion? All right, thank you. Yeah, wait a second. I'm sorry, I've got a council member raising it. Yes, Councilmember O'Doherty?
Do we need a second? If so, I'll second.
I think we'll need a second on the actual motion. So why don't we go ahead and get a second from Councilmember O'Doherty for the record, and then we'll go to Councilmember. See, this is strange, right? Because we can't do it in the right order. City Clerk.
Yeah, at this point, we don't have a formal motion yet. At this point, Councilor Cumby has introduced the item by title only. So it's a little out of order because we don't know who's being nominated yet, who you want to introduce. So it is a little different than most of our items, but I think it's okay for the city manager to go ahead and introduce the item, let you know what the item is in regards to, and then the council can discuss. But before we can discuss any formal motion, we have to have a motion on the floor. But you can put out your, I'm available kind of nominations before we get to the formal motion. Does that make sense?
I don't know if anybody cares, but the chair agrees, and we'll go to the city manager for the background. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So the background is that I think we all know that after 42 years of service to this community, Chief Dale Stalder has announced and told us he's retiring. In that 42 years, he served 12 years as our police chief. And so that has caused us to undertake a search for a new police chief. That is, of course, a hiring decision of the city manager, but it's very important to me that I have a lot of diverse perspectives as we vet candidates for this position, and those perspectives will really be invaluable as we come to a community decision about who our new police chief should be. As you know, so far we've conducted an internal survey with elected officials like yourself here at the city, as well as staff members on the leadership management team and within the police department, looking inside and looking out into our community and trying to determine and prioritize the sort of desired skills and attributes of candidates for police chief. In addition to the top qualifications in my mind, which are that we have the most knowledgeable, skilled, and able police chief for this community, because that's what this community deserves. We've also, as you know, started advertising this position nationally about, I think, 3 weeks ago, and we have retained Public Sector Search and Consulting. They are a firm specialized in the recruitment and selection process for executives in law enforcement. And that's why we've brought them in to help us with this recruitment. They'll also be facilitating the vetting process for candidates that will start in early September. Late this month, in August, they will recommend semifinalists from the candidate pool, and then through a series of interviews that I'm setting up, we will facilitate as a public PSSC will facilitate the interviews, and as a community will evaluate the candidates. So what you're being asked to do tonight is to appoint a member from the governing body who will serve on the community interview panel and interview semifinalists in early September. If you have any other questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Lastly, I'll mention that if for the 8 of you who will not sit on the interview panel, you will have an opportunity in September to attend the public reception for the finalist candidates. I suspect that's going to be around the 3rd week of September, and we're nailing down the dates right now. So all 9 members of the City Council will have a valid role in the selection process.
Thank you, City Manager, and I appreciate that last emphasis there. Of course, City Council, you're gonna meet these folks in this final pool. Either way. Any questions for the City Manager on this one? City Manager, what do you anticipate the time commitment being on that for that series of meetings that you described? Because I'm sure that's something that council members might want to take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely, Council. And Mayor, I just realized I didn't give you all that date in the cover sheet, and boy, what an oversight on my part. The interview panel for the semifinalist candidates will be held on September 7th, and it will be a nearly all-day affair from 8 until 4 in the afternoon.
Lunch provided?
We will feed you lunch after all of that hard work, yes.
All right, so you heard it. You heard it. You won't go without lunch for that all day. All right. Thank you, City Manager. Any other questions for the City Manager on this? All right. Do we have any nominations for someone? Yes. Council Member Somerville.
Mayor, I would like to nominate Aaron O'Doherty.
All right. Council Member O'Doherty to accept that nomination.
I have a caveat. I'll be out of town that day. I could be available on Zoom, but I'll be out of town. So,
City Manager.
Mayor, if I could, the interviews will be conducted by video, as we do not intend to fly in all of the semifinalists, so that would be absolutely acceptable, Councilor O'Doherty.
Councilmember O'Doherty, do you accept?
I accept.
All right. Are there any other nominations? Councilmember Schuster.
Yes, I would nominate myself. I can easily swing that day off and be here in person.
All right. We got nominations for Councilmember O'Doherty, nominations from Councilmember Schuster. Do we have any other nominations? We'll close nominations, and we'll go to a vote in order of nominations. And of course, Councilmember Schuster, I'll go to one, and then I'll go to the next. However, whoever gets 5 votes will be appointed to the panel. Understood, Council? Whoever gets 5 votes? Yes, City Clerk.
Can I just clarify? Am I asking each councilor for who they would vote for, or are you asking me to vote separately for each one?
City Clerk, no, I appreciate that clarification. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vote with you. We'll take this vote, and then we'll put the name for the final motion, and then we'll do a roll call vote on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe so.
All right. So what we'll do is we'll have the City Clerk do a roll call, and you can just voice for the nominee that you want. Does that work for everyone? Yeah? Understood? All right. Go ahead, City Clerk.
Cumbie, who do you vote for?
Councilor O'Doherty.
Gabriel, who do you vote for?
Councilor O'Doherty.
Harrington, who do you vote for?
Councilor O'Doherty.
Councilor O'Doherty, who do you vote for?
Myself.
Councilor Schmeckel, who do you vote for?
Councilor O'Doherty.
Councilor Schuster, who do you vote for?
I vote for myself.
Councilor Somerville, who do you vote for?
Councilor O'Doherty.
Councilor Pierce, Vice Mayor Pierce, who do you vote for?
I'll vote for Councilor Schuster.
Mayor Weaver, who do you vote for?
I'll vote for Councilor O'Doherty.
So Mayor, we have 7 votes for O'Doherty and 2 for Councilor Schuster.
Thank you, City Clerk. Then it said the chair's estimation that the motion should now go back to Councilmember Cumby for the nominee.
Okay. I move to approve Resolution 2022-53, appointing Councilor Aaron O'Doherty as a council member to the community interview panel and authorize the mayor and city clerk to sign.
Second.
Motion and a second from Councilmember Gabriel. Council, I don't believe there's any discussion required. The background was already provided to us by the city manager, but I'll give you an opportunity just in case. Also, if there's any public comment on the motion. Council, back to you. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Cumby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 nos, Your Honor.
That motion carries. Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you, Council. That's going to take us now to the last item on our special meeting agenda. Councilmember Schuster, can I call on you for item number J?
Thank you. I move we adjourn from this special meeting and start the work session.
Second.
There's a motion and a second from the Vice Mayor. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
All right. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any opposed? Same sign. All right. We are adjourned and into the work session. Does anybody request a recess for a few minutes, or do you want to just keep going? It looks like we want to just keep going into the work session. Councilmember Harrington? Okay. I saw a finger up for just a minute. All right, there we go. So we will now convene our work session for August 23rd, 2022, the Laramie City Council. And we will go to public comment on non-agenda items. Yes, sir, council members. It's a special double bonus public comment on non-agenda items evening here at the City Council. Nobody seems to be taking advantage of the coupon. We will close the public comment and go to the work session item, which will be a missing middle housing update. And we have a number of staff folks, but as is custom, we will start with the city manager. Thank you, City Manager.
Thank you, Council. Good evening. While the clerk puts the presentation on screen share, I'll just let you know that the intention for our meeting this evening was one, to satisfy your request for an update, and we will be covering kind of a refresher on what we've accomplished. As you know, our strategy for enabling housing to development to proceed in the community was really a multi-pronged approach that's covered a number of years. So we're going to refresh on what we've done so far, and then we'll talk about what future steps we anticipate will be in front of you in coming months. I believe that will satisfy the request of the folks who had asked for this work session, and if not, we'll have an opportunity at the end for you all to ask questions. So as you know, Council, our focus has been on what we call missing middle housing, which is housing for workforce, sometimes referred to as attainable housing, meaning that it is attainable in terms of price point and is of sufficient quality for workforce housing. Our previous economic development staff person used to say, you know, that we spend a lot of time, energy, and effort working on economic development to bring and create jobs in Laramie. But at night, those jobs, those people who fulfill those jobs, they have to have a suitable place to go home and rest and put their head on a pillow. So as you know, our focus has been heavily on housing to facilitate and complement our economic development efforts. So here's our general work session outline. As we go to the next slide, we'll kind of kick off with some of that background information. If you have any detailed questions about the background, I'll tell you that I stripped a lot of that background information out of tonight's presentation, but we preserved those slides so we could reference them if need be. The reason for that is that I just didn't want to restate what we've already presented, I think, in 3 separate work sessions for you in the last 3 months. But this slide sums it up nicely. We have been doing ongoing and in-depth work here at the city for running on 3 years now to remove barriers to housing development that might have been there because of our municipal code requirements. And we've worked very hard to support the private market where we were able to do that. The need for more housing of every type in this community is very well documented, as you know, beginning in 2015 with our city housing study, and then supported by a host of other documents in the years since 2015. This year, I put a little snippet here from your adopted goal resolution, and as you know, Goal A is related to economic development, and Milestone 3 under Goal A, I memorialized the work that we intended to do in 2022, building upon those past years of work. Next slide. So I'm going to let our planning manager, Derek Taney, walk you through the next slides just to remind us all the body of work that we've done to remove any barriers in city code. And then we'll finish up the evening talking about what you can expect moving forward. Derek?
Yeah, Mayor, Council. So, as Janine mentioned, we've been working on housing for quite some time, and really in 2020 with the Laramie Code Audit, which is what you see here, it really started to formalize kind of our community's direction and vision and where we needed to go in terms of potential changes that we could make for the city of Laramie that could help kind of move the needle in the right direction, as we've said before, to improve housing options, housing quality, housing types in the community. And so in 2020, we did complete the code audit. This was kind of right there at the beginning of COVID, but we were able to rally community members and staff, and we were able to complete this document, which now over the last 2 years, you've all been intricately involved in terms of actually making the changes that were recommended in this. And so what I think is really important is just pointing out a few things. In this study, you'll see, there's lots of information that points towards the importance of housing. And if you get anything out of all this work that we're doing, is housing plays a role in all of our lives and all sorts of aspects of our lives, everything from economic development to just putting a place to sleep, like Janine mentioned, to quality of life, making our community a place where people want to live and stay, retaining workforce, helping fellow organizations like the university and state entities. So all of those things tie together and create just an environment that housing plays a key role in. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Nancy, when you start looking at some of the things that we're talking about, is in the plan we identify 54% of renters are cost burdened, 30% of homeowners are cost burdened. And what you find is that in the Laramie community, it's kind of that bottom portion of the slide here, is really finding and getting units that are across the spectrum of housing types is what this community needs in order to start fulfilling some of those needs that really we as a community in Laramie need to have. And this allows for us to not only achieve different types of housing, so different types, everything from your single family to maybe a condo and a multifamily unit, but also this type of housing provides housing at different price points and at different levels where people can enter into home ownership or just providing a place essentially to live. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nancy. In Laramie, we did survey. We found kind of what people desire, what they want to see. As you'll see, single family homes are pretty high up there. Definitely, probably, it's part of that American dream. But what's interesting is if you kind of look at that, everything that's in the middle, cottages, bungalows, smaller homes, ADUs or accessory dwelling units in duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. the small apartment buildings and townhomes and condos really make up a large bulk of the rest of all the housing types that people are really desiring to see. And so what you'll see in that housing study that was produced in 2020 in that code audit is, how do we start to move the needle in the right direction to achieve this type of housing? Next slide. So really what we did is we took what was in that plan and we started implementing. We started making recommendations and bringing those recommendations to you, and then seeing where we landed. And so if you go to the next slide, Nancy, really kind of what did we do? Remember, we did do stuff before 2020 and before this project. We did adopt the Unified Development Code, which included a streamlined process for many aspects of the development review process. The fact is, review and development is faster. It is faster than it was beforehand. Online application processes are allowed to allow builders and developers to submit materials digitally for city-issued permits. So that was done. Publish schedules to provide predictability and timelines for developers so that they can rely on those timelines to submit complete applications. And just kind of a point of note, 94% of our preliminary plats and final plats are approved. New residential lots are being created in those during those processes and are getting approved in those processes, which is, I think, important to point out because you all play a role in that, ultimately approving preliminary plats, but also those final plats that come through kind of like this evening. So where are we at? With the 2020 code audit, there were really specific recommendations. And so first off, we tackled changes to our downtown commercial zones. We increased we modified, I should say, the building height requirements to allow for taller buildings, which means more density. The reality is with that density comes more affordability and a high cost type of construction in those downtown areas. We modified parking requirements for residential uses in the downtown. And through those changes, what you see here is we've kind of checked that item off the list. In that code audit, there weren't a whole lot of recommendations for the downtown, but this kind of, once again, moves the needle in the right direction. Next slide. The next section that we took a run at was related to parking. Across the country, parking is one of the driving factor that chews up land on properties and reduces the amount of units you can get on a lot. And with that, it drives up multifamily development costs fairly significantly. And so with those changes that we proposed, the effort was to reduce the amount of parking that we found on these properties, especially any type of multifamily properties, so anything more than one unit. What it does provides for greater density and reduced costs for construction. Building parking lots are expensive. And with less parking, the hope is that they reinvest that money into either more units, which is an income generator on those lots. And for many investors, that's a key in whether a project actually is profitable and is a financially feasible product or not. I will note one of our more recent multifamily affordable housing projects. It's a project over in West Laramie off of Harrison Street. This section of code here, they were just back in our offices just recently. We're very excited about this change and are really looking forward to trying to find another location in this community. And things like that do make a difference, and it's a tangible difference. They noted that this was a reason why they're back in the community, is so that they can maybe make projects feasible in our community where other communities maybe parking is inhibiting factor. This kind of puts us maybe above some of those other communities when they're looking at other sites or places to site. Next slide, Nancy. This next change was related to our R2, R2M, and R3 zoning districts. These are the zoning districts that allow for different multifamily development. And in the recommendations, really what we achieved here was some reduced setbacks, reduced lot widths, and reduced lot size. What this allows for is it allows for developers to plat and develop smaller lots and allows them to build smaller homes on those lots. When prior in our code, lots were required to be larger, really to make the project economical, you had to usually put a larger house on it. what that did is it really kind of boxed the community in terms probably of the price point that you're going to anticipate when you build all the same kind of type and size of housing. This will allow for that variety to occur. If you kind of think back to a few slides before, smaller bungalows, cottages, and smaller units are something that was desired. This provides that avenue to make that happen. Secondly, one of the big changes that we made is removing the square footage requirement per principal building. This was a piece of the old code that kind of stuck through the times from old code to the Unified Development Code to today. And by removing that, what it does is it does allow for property owners in those multifamily zoning districts potentially add more units without going over exceeding some of the maximum square footage on some of the lots that were found in our community. We are already seeing people taking advantage of that, which is a good thing. Nothing super crazy, but also too, this code hasn't been in place that long, and so developers and builders are still kind of getting their hands wrapped around it, which is, but they are learning, and that's what we want to see. So,
Mr. Jeannie, can I jump in with just a little question here, without interrupting your flow too much, Council? Are you okay?
Absolutely.
Are you okay with that, Council? For me to, my question is, I wonder sometimes, and I think this is a question to ask a planner. When I look at sort of the historical patterns of development in Laramie, which, you know, I only have so much capacity to do, but you can kind of see, all right, this neighborhood was built quite a while ago. Maybe this was built really early on in Laramie's history, and this other neighborhood might have come on. The majority of the homes in the neighborhood might have come on the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And it seems like at some point, the layout and the housing stuff made a real jump from kind of smaller lot development built closer together, you know, which seemed to kind of stay pretty regular through mid-century, sometime in the 60s, and then it started to move into more of these larger lots. And I think in some way, what we're trying to, with our limited ability to do so through city code and requirements, is try to get back to encouraging smaller development. Do we seem to see, you know, does there seem to be a date that we could reference as to when this jump was made? Because it seems to me like it started in the 60s, where we went from the tighter lot development into more of the big lots with the bigger yards and the bigger setbacks. Is there anything to my observation here, or am I missing something?
Mayor, Council, so yes, keen observation. So what you actually had is right after World War I, you saw a little uptick in basically house sizes increasing based upon money that was, you know, coming through the military and people coming out of World War I. And where you saw the major jump was after World War II and some of the GI bills and things like that came through that provided housing for our military people that had served. And in that time period, housing sizes something like doubled. I don't know, I can't remember the exact numbers, but your size of houses just doubled. And then what you are now seeing now is simply in America, we have very large houses. We have large houses with actually large garages. And so with that comes the need for larger lots, if that's what the product is.
Well, it seems like it just kept doubling, right, Mr. Cheney? So they got bigger after World War I. Then there was maybe a little contraction. There wasn't as much economic activity. Then World War II, then bigger again to today's, you know, McMansion bill.
From World War II on, it's just kept getting bigger. It's been a trend period. How average housing size has increased since then. However, more recently, what we're seeing across the world really is a desire for housing types that are smaller and more appropriate for different people's different stages of life. And so I think we're seeing maybe a little bit of a correction in that, where people, as maybe they age or as they retire, or maybe if their family is changing, they're accommodating their housing type to their time in their life versus just buying a house, staying in a house for 40 or 50 years, no matter the stage of their life, and then you know, maybe passing that home on to their relatives or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's been the history, and we're not seeing that as much anymore. We're a much more mobile group of people. And so with that, changing your housing type for what you actually need is becoming more prominent. And I think that leads us to, you know, how do we make sure that our codes are set up to allow for developers and our development community to react to that change as we need it. If your codes aren't set up, we're already behind. And so that's what the hope is when we make changes like this, is that we're ahead of the game versus waiting to just do it when we have people coming in our door saying, hey, I want to build smaller lots, and our code doesn't allow for it.
Thank you, Mr. Tini. That was exactly the kind of community development type direction I wanted you to help us with in this conversation, because I think that part of this conversation can kind of get glossed over, but it really helps give the whole conversation shape, in my view, that we need to, you know, we provide a little context here, and it helps give the rest of the discussion shape, particularly that communities and cities have a responsibility to try to anticipate to some extent what those housing needs are going to be, not just because we don't have enough, but because do we have enough of what's going to be needed, you know, thus the title, right? The missing middle. And it's a pretty imperfect process, and we just have to do our best. But I just wanted, Council, thank you, but I just wanted to digress a little bit in that direction, because I think it helps give the rest of the conversation a little shape. So I appreciate that, Mr. Tini, and please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy, you can go to the next slide if you want. So following these multifamily changes, really then through that conversation, you know, largely driven by council, was we had this conversation about what about applying similar changes to our single family zoning districts. And so kind of after we wrapped up our multifamily changes, staff brought back changes that were similar in nature to the multifamily zones for our single family zoning districts. And very much like we saw in the multifamily zoning districts, we reduced widths, changed setbacks, and modified really the requirements of these zoning districts to allow for smaller lots and more compact development. But also, by changing setbacks, we allowed for flexibility on those lots to really allow for maybe home types on smaller properties that are still similar to what maybe people are expecting or seeing today. Another large change that we made was the provisions of allowing accessory dwelling units in single family zone districts. And so that's a large change and a bigger change that a lot of communities are really starting to see and try to take advantage of. So next slide, Nancy. Let's see. I think at this slide I was going to pass it back over to Janine. One thing I was just going to say, Council, I think what I don't want to have kind of go by the wayside when I kind of run through those slides fairly quickly is just to let you know those changes that were made over the last 2 years are a significant amount of changes related to housing. And by no means should you take that lightly as a council in terms of the progress that's being made in terms of housing changes. There are communities across the West that would love to have just one part of those changes done in the last 2 or 3 years. We got them all done. And I think that that's really important to note, and I think really does show as a community that our desire is to try to provide that flexibility and at least provide the option and open that door to accommodate housing types, needs, and different quality or different types that our community wants to see. And so I think it's something that we need to kind of really note the importance of, that we've got that work done. And so I'm going to let Janine kind of jump into all the other things that we've done, not just code changes related to housing. And so take it away.
Janine, I feel a need to interject. I feel a need to, once again, because this is what I do, I feel a need to interject a little bit on the heels of Derek's comment, which is that I appreciate that. appreciate that last comment very much, Mr. Tini. And I think also, I don't think the council does take it like we all staff and council and community alike would note that those changes that you mentioned and the scope of them is something the council recognizes. And of course, we all recognize it isn't as if they occurred without some level of community turbulence around them, but they're really important. And anytime you're getting into that type of change and into that type of long-term view, it's not always easy. They aren't easy things. So I appreciate that you mentioned that, and I think the council recognizes that, and I think we recognize that this community is willing to be adaptable, and hopefully that is. Go ahead, City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I'm glad that Derek said that too, because I was going to mention that as well. As we were putting the presentation together, it seems so simple. It's just like 4 or 5 slides, but the council members and staff know it is a tremendous amount of effort and energy and public review and public input. So yeah, really notable. I did want to jump off from the code pieces that you've changed that free up and open the doors for a greater quantity of housing and different types of housing, and talk a little bit about the quality of housing and the changes that have occurred since 2020 that have dealt with quality. And I want to mention that, when I looked back at our resident surveys, the public have repeatedly, for nearly a decade, mentioned the quality of Laramie's housing as a critical issue that they wanted the city government to address. And it wasn't just single family homes, it wasn't just apartment homes, it was kind of all types of housing. And so the 2 things that you have done in the last year, really, in 2021 and 2022, was 1, you've adopted the rental housing standards, and what those do is set some minimum standards that have to be met in a rental property to sort of qualify it for human habitation. And I hear myself saying that, and it almost sounds absurd, but really that is the part of that ordinance. It also asks for our rentals to be licensed so that we can have better communication with our landlords and presumably even help them with habitability. And then here next year in 2023, the complaint resolution program piece will take effect, where our tenants in the community, if they believe their rental is not meeting those habitability minimum standards, then they can seek some recourse through the city and some work with their landlord to try to improve that situation. And then the other large ordinance change that you've made is to adopt contractor licensing requirements. Both of these elements of code were called out in some of those studies that I mentioned early on in the presentation. And the reason that contractor licensing is important is because Laramie just never licensed contractors. We never had any license that sort of establishes proof of competency for contractors, where they should demonstrate they have experience and training, that they have a quality of workmanship and professionalism that other communities are enjoying because they have licensing. And ultimately what licensing does is it protects property and property owners through that piece of code. As you know, contractors who are licensed will also have liability coverage. You recall we heard a lot of stories about folks who thought they were contractors and really didn't perform that workmanship to the level that was satisfactory, and then the folks who had that work performed on their property having no recourse. So this provides that venue for recourse and for higher quality work in the community. I wanted to revisit this slide. Derek mentioned it, but these were those types of housing that our community told us they wanted. And I put a check mark here next to every one of those types of housing that were desirable, as told to us by our residents. And the check means you've done something in code to either improve the quantity or the quality of that housing. And as I'm looking at it now, I should have added a check mark under the large apartment buildings as well, because the rental housing habitability standards certainly apply to that category as well as to the other unchecked category, which is cottages, bungalows, and smaller homes. So really, the actions taken in the last 2 years address every single one of the typologies that our residents said they would like to see, and make more of those and make them higher quality, we hope, in the long term. So turning from the past to the future, we know housing is going to be a key to our community thriving. Nancy, next slide, or next click, I guess, next button. We've talked over the last year on, I think, 3 separate occasions in work sessions about other strategies beyond code revisions that we could use to address housing. And these are the list of strategies that we've discussed. You will note that tax increment financing is on this list. And of all of the things that you see here, I think tax increment financing is where we are going to go next. We think that is the best of the fruit hanging that remains for us. So next slide. There are a couple places in the community where we could facilitate some housing development on city-owned property where tax increment financing could be a relevant model. And one of those locations is at Crystal Court. I won't read to you from the slide, but as you know, the city owns lots there, and staff are continuing to evaluate that area as a potential location where we could facilitate some housing development. There are some constraints at Crystal Court, notably covenants that lie on that land, but we will continue looking at that. The second main area where the city has property that we own where we could facilitate housing development directly is at the Turner Tract. We continue to look at this area as well, but ultimately, if you go to the next slide, let me talk a little bit about tax increment financing, and then we'll go to the third area. So tax increment financing is a tool that we can use, a financial tool, to just help us invest in public infrastructure and some other improvements that would allow us to ready land for development, and really that investment being paid back through higher tax rates being created by the improvement on the land. A Tif district does have to be defined geographically. Usually this is done through an urban renewal authority. We're going to talk a lot more about that in a couple slides here. Strategically, you can use TIF to invest in areas where you really need to see revitalization. And for that reason, an area like the Turner Tract, which is not in need of revitalization, and in fact, a lot of that land is raw land right now, green land, green space, that you can see where TIF isn't really an ideal fit for an area like that. The last thing about TIF is it does allow the city to kind of upfront the costs that are related to those costly improvements for roads and infrastructure. So in this community, we've not used TIF before, but Todd and I have been working together and hope to move forward to use TIF in the third area on the next slide, where the city does have publicly owned property and could facilitate housing development. And so with that, I'm going to let Todd take it over from here, and he's going to talk to you about North 4th Street a little bit, and a few slides on TIF and urban renewal and what we anticipate coming your way in the next 3 to 4 months.
Council, can you hear me all right? Janine, can you hear me all right? Yeah, okay, thanks, Janine. You know, obviously you're all aware that we've vacated the land on North 4th Street. And we did go through a planning study through some interns from Colorado University, one of which is actually now helping us with the development of our Urban Renewal Authority, Mark Christensen. They had developed 3 scenarios for that property that included somewhere between 70 up to, I believe, 150 to 200 homes, 200 potential residential units in that area. What we're kind of eyeballing or wanting to do is to make sure that we work with a mixed use concept where we maybe have heavy residential over retail, or we have some mixture with some community related housing. So the benefit of this type of property or this type of development is that we can get dense and we can actually provide some impact in multiple homes in this area through use of our public property. If you can go to the next slide, Nancy. You know, if you're in Planning Commission, we have we had started working on the Urban Renewal Authority, which requires the establishment of the blight in the city. And the resolution to establish blight may be in front of council as early as mid-September. But North 4th Street actually has 4 or 5 of the 9 conditions of blight that are established through Wyoming state statute. And that includes deteriorated structures, failing infrastructure, places that really just need areas, unfinished roads and proper roadway structures, and areas that we can really use tax increment financing funding to help offset those costs so that they aren't borne by the developer and are actually borne, as Janita mentioned, through upfront funding and then paid for over time through the tax increment financing. Next slide. Tax increment financing, it is a huge concept. I wish it was super easy to describe and something that's easy digestible, but it just plain and simple isn't. It's a large project. But if you look at that blue box down in the bottom left, that's what would happen if you potentially didn't do any development at all. Your property tax collection would stay the same across that time, which I think it shows 23 years or 25 years on this graph. But if you didn't have any development. Now, if you did have housing development, property tax obviously goes up. By establishing the Urban Renewal Authority and the Tax Increment Financing District, what you do is everybody that's in the taxing entity continues to get that blue box tax for the time that you set up the tax increment financing period. But you're able to use the property tax that would have been generated that would have gone to those taxing entities for the development costs to pay back the upfront costs over time, whether it's through bonds or agreements with the developer or whichever. Then when you reach the end of the TIF collection cycle, all of the taxing entities get all the bonus tax redistributed to them as it normally would have been. And we really think that this is a valuable tool because tax increment financing can be used to establish improvements to roadways and infrastructure. And on North 4th Street, obviously we got to tackle stormwater. And so we can really use that tax increment financing to make improvements that benefit the whole surrounding community and also provide benefits in housing for that area. Next slide, Nancy. The timeline for urban renewal agencies, I'm hoping to be in front of you at the next council meeting with the ordinance establishing the URA. And obviously that will take 3 readings. And then we're going to come through with the initiative resolution just right on the heels. Then we'll appoint members through December and hopefully get into our first meeting in operations in January. And then hopefully start receiving project plans and developing concepts in order to put it to use. Quite frankly, there's some other places that it may be a very valuable tool for something that we need to do. One of the big things that it can help out with is demolition. And demolition is going to be a huge issue when you think about potentially, I don't know, let's say the recently vacated Slade Elementary School could become dense housing. There's a potential for a lot of places to redevelop and to become housing without displacing current residents that are already in housing situations. So I think we've got a lot of opportunities. And the one thing I will say is that regardless of how the URA goes, all the agreements will come back through council in some form or fashion so they can be approved, so that there is protection for our community from seeing some of those failed URAs that have happened across the country. Next slide, Nancy. So we've got a lot of work to do. One is working with the county assessor and the county treasurer, which Janine did start our discussion with. We got to work with the taxing districts. Whedon Pest, Albany County School District number 1, the county, I got to try to remember the rest of them. But anyway, there's a number of them that all need to know what's happening and what's happening with tax increment financing and how it works. Again, remember it's collected over time and that we've got just some other items to do as we work on this and get through it. And hopefully we'll be successful, who knows, as early as next year with our first project out the door. Next slide.
Actually, if you can go back a slide, Nancy, I'll kind of wrap up here. Council, I wanted to share with you this data point on this slide as well, and that is, as you know, we've been in our data collection phase for the Laramie resident spring survey through Zen City. And as of today, this is the results to the question that we put there to see if our community felt like it was appropriate for the city to take that next step beyond removing barriers in our municipal code and actually get into facilitating housing development on our publicly owned property. The question put to the residents was, Laramie city government should become directly involved in development to expand housing options for middle-income workers and low-income persons. And when that question has been posed starting in actually the 1st of May through today, 56% of our residents agreed with that statement. The gray area is the proportion that were neutral, and the red area is the proportion that said no, they did not agree with that statement. So you can see that, a majority of our residents do see that that would be an appropriate role, I guess, for city government. And with that, I wanted to share that data point. The survey is ongoing and continues collecting data. If we see any notable change in that, I'd certainly come back to you with that. But I just thought that was an interesting point to kind of wrap up the presentation as we contemplate becoming more active in facilitating housing development and moving to that next step with the URA and tax increment financing in coming months. Lastly, if I could editorialize just a titch, I guess, I certainly have heard folks in the community starting to talk about the Urban Renewal Authority and tax increment financing. I want to say that this is something that we have not done as a community and that we do not take lightly at a staff level, and Todd has done a ton of research, as have I. We've engaged professional outside firms who have experience in implementing URA and TIF to work with us, and all of the purpose of that, of course, is to avoid the pitfalls that other communities may have had in other states under different enabling legislation and statutory frameworks. So our intention is to minimize the burden on developers for infrastructure and to create a scenario that's positive for our community. And so I appreciate all of the comments from the public because that helps us to avoid those areas. And that's the end of our presentation, and we are ready for questions, and I hope we have answered the questions that you hope to have answered this evening, Council.
Thank you very much, Janine. I do have a question, but I'd like to give the other council members a chance first, instead of just jumping right in there. We'll start with Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a question for Todd. I'm curious on the urban renewal resolution or ordinance that's coming forward. Is that specific to North 4th Street, or will it create an urban renewal agency, I guess is maybe what the A is for, but I'm not exactly sure. Will it create that agency that then will outline projects, each one coming before council for approval? Did I understand that correctly, that second bit?
That second bit, Councilor Harrington, to you, or Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Harrington. The Urban Renewal Agency, you'll actually see it in multiple steps as it works through. The first initiative ordinance actually just establishes that within the city limits of the city of Laramie, we do have blight. So it doesn't establish one area over the other, although we do use examples from across town that show that there are areas of blight in our community. It doesn't establish the site. The ordinance that you're going to see actually establishes the Urban Renewal Authority, how it operates, how many members it has, the rules that it goes by. After the Urban Renewal Agency is established, then they'll start to take project plans, and you'll see resolutions that come through and establish specific districts, say North 4th Street or South 3rd Street down by just east of the Maverick, or you might see something that's, south of 3rd Street down by the Maverick that you might see. But you'll see another resolution that establishes the exact size of the tax increment financing district or the Urban Renewal Authority agency where it will function. You'll see it in multiple facets. Did that help answer your question, Councilor Harrington?
Yeah, it did. It gave me one other if I could, Mayor. Are those projects then, Assistant City Manager, are those projects requested by a developer who says, I have an idea for this land, does it fit in with your Urban Renewal Authority? Or are they driven by the authority itself?
The Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Harrington, the projects can actually be received from the municipality itself. It can be received from developers. So it can be, the projects will get submitted and received and reviewed by the Urban Renewal Authority, and then decided if they're projects that they deem worthy to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
No problem, Councilmember Harrington. Vice Mayor Pierce, and then I'll go to Councilmember Schuster.
Yeah, thanks. I know we've been doing some interesting things related to our codes, and this has been a lot of work. I'm just wondering if we might be missing something, or is there something we need else to do in parallel to this, upcoming work and some of our past work. I feel like we're really working hard at, filling in some of the spots, but I'm wondering if there's something else that might be next, or could be coming forward potentially after the first of the year.
Mayor, I'll field that and pass it off to Derek, but through you, Councilor Pierce, you'll recall, Council, that you had asked for a work session, and we are preparing that for later in the fall. It's not been mentioned in the presentation, but that would be looking at the buffer zoning that you had asked to talk about, potentially around downtown commercial district, and also a potential overlay district for Ward 1. So Derek may want to weigh in further, and I think we may need some additional dialogue with Council to maybe understand what you're hoping to accomplish there. But we are planning to bring that work session in the fall as well. And Derek, you add anything if you'd like. If not, that's fine.
I mean, I think I just would add, there's a lot of tools out there, right, that communities can use. So, I mean, we're just starting to kind of initiate some of those first things that we felt that, really the code audit identified what are the biggest things that we can do that we think that will make the greatest impact. We've done those, and now we're kind of on the next stage of things, everything from maybe development incentives, or do we change standards within our code to reduce development costs? The sky's the limit, really. That's a whole nother work session, to be honest, probably. But really, there's a lot of other things out there, and I think, like Janine mentioned, maybe bringing these first couple things that council has requested later in the fall, and then maybe in the future keeping this dialogue going, because I would say that communities that are going to stay on top of housing this is going to be a constant thing within your agendas and as part of your work, I think, from here on out until major things change, probably globally. So plan on talking about housing forever.
Yeah, thanks. If I could just wrap up that question, Mayor, if that's okay. Councilor Pierce, the other thing I would add to your original question is, Laramie, I'll just be really candid with you all. Laramie struggles in that some communities have a lot of money to throw at this problem, to say minimize the cost to developers and builders and take that cost on using the public's money. Unfortunately, that is a tool our community does not have available to us. And I know I don't need to elaborate on the reasons for that. So the TIF and the URA are really powerful tools for us to use. I think they're timely and important because we really don't have any other way to help developers bear that cost. That idea of public-private partnership sounds really great on paper, but is limited to some degree by the means of your public, and our public entity doesn't have deep pockets. So,
yeah,
Vice
thanks,
Mayor.
Mayor. Yeah, if I could, I just want to thank you guys. I think it is a matter of rolling up our sleeves and just moving forward, just one piece at a time, at the pace we can handle, and the taking care of the low-hanging fruit, and then maybe a fruit that's a little bit more difficult to get to. So looking forward to keeping our sleeves rolled up and moving forward with this.
Thank you very much for that line of questioning. Go ahead, Councilmember Schuster, and then I'll go to you, Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you. A company did want to build where that blight is next to the Maverick, but could not come to conclusion or negotiate the proper worth of the property. So it sits empty. So I think this is all really great on paper and it really looks exciting, but is there any time in this where somebody takes a look at the property and says, well, he won't negotiate, they don't want to do what we say, so we're going to, and I'm going to use that word, condemn the property. Are we ever going to take that and do that to someone?
Honorable Mayor, if I can provide some insight to that, is I can't speak for the city and the actions they would take, but as far as an urban renewal authority, they aren't actually given the powers to use condemnation to accept property. So I can at least speak from the urban renewal authority. Given the property that Councilor Schuster has brought up, as I believe we've solved the issue that was holding up development to the east of the Maverick. And I hope that we'll see that coming through here shortly with housing development, to tell you the truth. It's my hope that we'll see it here real soon.
Any follow-up, Councilmember Schuster? I mean, we're kind of getting into hypothetical and whatnot, and we need to be careful about calling out specific areas, but I think your question has some merit. Any follow-up, Schuster?
Yeah, that a company wanted, the Maverick Corporation wanted to put another business there. And I don't know if I really know we need more housing, but I don't know if we need more housing on 3rd Street. I always think about families, and I don't want families up against 3rd Street with that huge amount of traffic there. That just scares me that something could happen. But yeah, I don't ever want to condemn somebody's property either, to step on somebody's private property rights. Thank you.
It's a tough proposition. We want the tools and we want the opportunity, but we want to do it right. Councilmember Schmeckel, thanks for waiting.
Thank you, Mayor. I remember back to the WHAM conference and being struck by the fact that with all the code changes we've made over the past year or so, that we are far ahead of several of our neighbors here in the state. And I'm going to equate it to, we have built the nicest fish tank in Wyoming and an ecosystem where the fish can thrive. The problem we have now is that there's no fish in our fish tank. I'm curious what we're doing, if there's partnerships to be had where the city develops like an express accessory dwelling unit process, where we can partner with local banks and local contractors to figure out ways to make it easy for our constituents to go through this process quickly, to make it very streamlined, to make it very public facing, so that we can get people to develop these as quickly as possible and find ways to take advantage of the situation here with what we've built.
Is that a question for?
I think that's a question for the city manager or Mr. Teeny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Teeny?
I mean, the concept is out there, so that the concept that you're talking about does exist. There are communities that do that. There are communities that essentially have houses, not even just ADUs, essentially plans on the shelf, pre-approved. You literally can walk in, grab that plan off, but it means you can't change anything. You build exactly what's been approved. You turn it in, you sign the paperwork, it's like a one-day processing thing, and you could have your building permit the next day. I mean, that's just another tool that I'm kind of talking about in terms of, I mean, those are things that could help. We, until we actually probably put those in place, it's hard to say, does that, tip the scales? Does that generate more houses, or are we constrained by something else like the number of contractors to build the houses, or materials, or who knows what else, right? But I think that those are the things you have to put in place to see, does it help?
I'm very curious to see what it would take to put one of these in place, or something like that, to stimulate some things. So, thank you.
Speaking to the point of needing to be open to more work and different kinds, being willing to try different kinds of things. I'm going to go to you, Councilmember Harrington, but I'd like an opportunity to get a question in here before we start going around to the second time. I appreciate your patience. This is for, I think, any and all staff members that have presented to us so far. Is it possible, when we utilize these tools, URA, pursuing TIF funding, I'd like to hear a little bit of more conversation around our approach with this. Could we, as the city, kind of adopt the general policy saying we're going to make these tools available, but the way those tools are going to be applied could be very specific, project by project, with a lot of scrutiny and transparency on a project by project basis once we get the overall tools in place. Is that something that is realistic to envision as the city's approach to this, so that there was that high level of scrutiny available for each project as it comes forward, and that level of transparency for people to really be able to wrap their heads around, in this instance, this is how this is going to be deployed for this purpose? Is that something that we are envisioning when we talk about utilizing these tools? Is that reasonable for the council to feel confident about moving forward? Is that we'll have a good process that people will really be able to understand on a project by project basis? Just some thoughts. Or is that going to depend on how we go about adopting this? Do you see what I'm driving at here, staff members?
Honorable Mayor, if I could take a stab at that through the Urban Renewal Authority at least. Keep in mind that all the development projects will first go through the plan. All the development projects and the establishment of the initial Tif District will go through the Planning Commission and City Council. And then any development agreements that lead towards how we use this Tif financing to promote development will also go through, I believe, Planning Commission and City Council. So I believe the process will be transparent and will be able to be highly scrutinized and looked at publicly, because really, quite frankly, we're using public funds to help assist code structure items or infrastructure items, something that's preventing the development from happening. And we need to make sure that the public's well aware of what we're using those public funds for.
Thank you. That's kind of overview I'm looking at. Other input on that question? Yeah, Mr. Cheney?
Just to follow up to that too is, and I think from conversations we've had internally and with our consultants, is finding property owners and developers that want to cooperate within the URA and have that be part of the process. You're going to not only have citizens, but the actual landowners hopefully involved in that process, which I think is great for council to see, is those landowners walking hand in hand with us as we go through that process, because ultimately it's an advantage for them as well. So that's, I think, a lot of our hopes as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of potential here, but in order to sort of maintain, I think, community support in the legitimacy of TIF financing type projects, for instance, and other things that we might pursue this, it always needs to be done that way, because I think there is a little bit of a bad rap around tax increment financing and urban renewal processes based on the experiences and outcomes that maybe we've seen in maybe some larger urban areas and some other places. I don't know how much those translate to the kinds of projects that you see in Wyoming, but I think they speak to a need to really up the game, if you will, in terms of that through each step of the process, making sure that there's a good deliberation, a lot of discussion about who's involved and what the outcomes are going to be. So I wanted to give you folks an opportunity to kind of touch on that. City Manager, I don't know if you have anything to add, otherwise I'll go to Councilmember Harrington. All right, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mayor. I think so, Derek. My conversation or my comment was going to be related to Councilor Smeckel's point earlier, and just maybe saying that if we started with simply new build ADUs, that might be constrained enough for some sort of like plan off the shelf thing, just as an option for somebody, rather than looking at, obviously people will want specifics with their house. They may care less about sort of the specifics of what will be either an ADU for a rental or for a family member. But it sort of shifted midway through the conversation. And so I guess maybe what I would add to what Councilor Smeckel said was that You know, I think we all hear every now and again about sort of like, you know, pick your city department, pick your city council member, or piece of code that is preventing things from moving along. And I think in a lot of ways that is sort of the give and take of the way development works. We are here to make sure it works for everyone. And I guess maybe what I would add is that I would be really interested as we go through this process and dig deeper, not specifically on the urban renewal, but in general on housing, as we see progress on these things, knowing where those pinch points are, knowing where we're hearing kind of continual, where things are slowing, even if they're not stopping at this point, where things slow down repeatedly, to see if we can find, creative solutions to get around some of those pinches in the process. I think that might be valuable as well. So, I'm not saying those exist now, but if you notice them, I would personally be quite interested to know. Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Harrington. If I can add, I think that speaks to Mr. Teeney's earlier point about our city government really needing to make, and the council really needing to make a commitment to be responsive and adaptive as we keep moving forward on this, because it's a super complicated issue, and that's what it's going to require if we're making any progress. Continuing to identify, okay, this might be an area where it seems to be slowing things up, or this has been identified as an area where we've really seen good results, and there seems to be some evidence behind taking this kind of approach. So let's try it here and continuing to be responsive in that way. Councilmember Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And just in an effort to not seem critical, I did want to acknowledge that Mr. Teeney said 94% of plats have been approved. So that's not insignificant and should not be breezed over. So I just wanted to add that maybe what I'm asking for is a really small thing in sort of the consideration of the what all of these 94% of plats are approved. I'm asking for very minute detail on like where we might get slowed up in that approval process. So just wanted to acknowledge that good work as well. Thanks, Mayor.
For sure, absolutely. And again, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Cheney, please.
Mayor, and I think just for the council's sake and for the public too, it's definitely something we're always trying to pay attention to, right? Like I say this sometimes, it's easy to get stagnant in government in terms of just, kind of going through the motions. But I think, when you have good staff and you have good members of the community who are paying attention to those things, you try to identify those things. And that's, those are reflective in the codes and the changes that we bring forward and why we adopt plans and why we look at our vision and reevaluate things. And I think when your community stops doing those things, that's when you want to start getting concerned. But I think that Laramie's not that way. We're always trying to make changes. We're always looking at that. And I think just, be vigilant in that. I think that kind of, that kind of sounds silly, but I think if you stay on top of that and start paying attention, I think that's a good thing. And I think that those are things that we're definitely trying to do, trying to pay attention, finding those pinch points and stuff. So.
If I could jump in for a moment too,
sure.
Mayor, I'd mention, it seems like I'm trying to think if it was last year or the year before, but I remember one of the members of council, I honestly don't remember who it was, but somebody saying, oh, we have more code changes coming forward. Staff keep bringing us these things, because they're so complex and detailed, and such an enormous amount of your time goes into vetting and evaluating those. And I remember one of the council members saying, why do staff keep bringing us this? And so to Derek's credit, right, staff keep bringing things forward that they see that they think are pinch points, even if sometimes it's not apparent, to the council or to even the public. So after that, I said to Derek, let's give everyone a little break, right? Because the code changes are hard. They're really, really hard. So Councilor Harrington, the planning staff are always suggesting little tweaks here and there based on their kind of real world experience of driving the development code every single day. And they'll keep doing that.
Thank you. And Mr. Cheney, I don't think that your statement was silly at all. I think the council knows exactly what you're getting at there. And it's just, it's just another reminder that this is not a static process, right? It's just going to keep requiring taking a look at different policies, seeing whether or not those kinds of things are good fits for Laramie, and then deciding whether or not we want to pursue them and getting the community feedback about them. I really appreciate this overview, staff, and I think one of the reasons that you saw this requested was because there has been so much, and I think we needed to come back and kind of do the umbrella overview of where we were, where all of those changes brought us to now, and then what's upcoming. And if I can, I'd also like to just make one more statement, with regard to a URA adoption and the potential use of TIF funding. I think I can say confidently that every member of this council is not interested in pursuing tools that are going to make existing developed areas and property owners put in a bad place where they're struggling. What we're trying to do is see what kind of tools we might be able to utilize to bring on some development of things that we're having trouble initiating without these tools. Some kinds of housing developments in certain areas and things like that. What we're not trying to do is encourage a gentrifying policy for the city of Laramie. That is not where we're going here. And I think this council and the councils that come after, they're going to be pretty sensitive to that. And I think I can feel pretty comfortable in making that statement. That is not the type of plan that this council wants to pursue with any of these tools. And I think there's going to be some vigilance about what these impacts are going to be, both from the staff and this council, in terms of seeing what those impacts are going to be. And that's always going to be at the back of mind when we're talking about using these tools. One thing that's good for us is, of course, we're not the first town that's trying to take a look at using these in a good way. And maybe we can reference back and say, well, that's an outcome we'd like to avoid. We'd like to see more of what happened here in this successful community, as opposed to things that put pressure on older neighborhoods and property tax valuations and some of those other concerns. I think that's going to be very much in people's wheelhouse as we talk about these things and pursue these tools. Do we have any other comments here? Should we go to some public comment on this, council? Yeah, okay. Public comment. Going to recognize Brett Glass. We're going to let Mr. Glass in, and Mr. Glass, you've got the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Well, I've been watching the presentation with great interest, and the city staff certainly patted itself on the back for some of the recent changes. But in fact, some of these have added barriers to attainable, desirable housing, and I'd like to point these out and make some suggestions as to how to improve things, because we all want Laramie to prosper, and so we don't want to do things that are counterproductive. The first thing I'd like to suggest the council does going forward is repeal the very harsh requirement to use only licensed contractors for all work requiring a permit. This has proved to be a huge cost burden the homeowners and renters. It's slowing development. Builders are having trouble getting things done. I have been trying all summer to get a sewer line redone, and it's really just a matter of digging up and replacing some plastic pipe. I can do that better than the licensed contractor who botched the job the first time, but I can't find a licensed contractor to do it. And tenants in a rental are suffering as a result of that. So I'd really like you to consider loosening that requirement in a reasonable way. The other thing I'd like you to consider doing is, at least to some extent, reinstating single-family zoning. Employees in the workforce universally aspire to having single-family homes in quiet single-family neighborhoods, and they want to have garages to store their stuff and keep clutter off the street. If we don't have at least some of that, we won't have economic development and we won't have economic diversification. But right now, the only way you can get that for sure in a neighborhood is through CC&Rs and having an HOA. And an HOA, you have to pay dues. That raises the cost of the housing. Let's remove the need for that, at least in neighborhoods where, at least in some of the neighborhoods. We shouldn't go universally to not having any single-family zoning. We should also avoid densifying housing to such an extent that it creates housing problems. Densification can make housing undesirable, crowded, and noisy, which might appeal to college students, but it won't appeal again to members of the workforce. This missing middle we're talking about. People come to Laramie to escape dense cities, and we're not Fort Collins, and we're not Boulder, and we don't want to be. Our city is going to lose its primary appeal if we destroy that advantage. We should also, in terms of rentals, change the ordinances that create more expensive rents, such as excluding rentals from curb and gutter subsidies and putting the full cost of nuisance abatement on rental property owners instead of working with them and the police and the city. The rental housing ordinance is duplicative because state statutes already require housing to be safe and habitable, and we don't want to bloat the city bureaucracy, hike rents, impose dual licensing upon real estate practitioners, violate due process, or have rules that don't apply to lots of housing like UW, WCDA, or specially favored groups. Instead, if you don't believe that the state law is adequate, I urge you to approach legislators to change them on the state level, instead of trying to create a whole new bureaucracy, which has already been ruled unconstitutional in order to do that. Now, tomorrow night, you're going to be going to a meeting about the aquifer. And some of the most promising locations for new workforce housing are to the east and southeast, which are over the Casper Aquifer. The aquifer plan that's been proposed will make it super expensive to build in those places. So we need to talk about how to make that less expensive, getting grants, subsidies, do something to mitigate the costs so that we can expand in that direction.
That's your time, Mr. Glass. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other public comments? Other public comment? Seeing none. Back to the council. Are there any more thoughts or questions on this? Staff, I think you've done a good job on a very complex problem, and I very much appreciate this overview. And I can tell you firsthand that although some of these changes and discussions we've had have been at times controversial, occasionally difficult, based on the feedback that I've received from people in this community across a pretty broad spectrum, I think there's been support for it because there's a recognition that we're trying to deal with some difficult problems in this community that don't have easy solutions and that require some real changes and some new approaches. And that's going to continue to be the case. There will be those that will argue against those. There will be those that will resist those. And then there will be those that will take an open-minded approach to problem solving. And as has been stated many times tonight, it's not over yet. This will be something we continue to need to work on. And I think it was really worth the council's time to come back and get a overview of where we're at up to this point. And I appreciate it very much. So we'll see now if we have public comments on non-agenda or work session topic items. We recognize Mr. Glass. Mr. Glass, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I only wanted to mention one other thing, which is that I hope that council will, on the last Tuesday of the month, hold the 5th Tuesday meetings that they haven't held for the last several months. It's important for council to listen to the public, and if you want input on the issues you've discussed tonight or other ones, please hold the meetings so that people have a chance to talk to their council members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. It's a great opportunity to remind folks there will be a special meeting of the City Council that is scheduled for the 30th of August. And that special meeting begins at 6 o'clock p.m., correct, City Clerk? Thank you. So the council will be meeting on the 30th. All right. Now we're into City Council updates and council comments. Updates, City Council members, any committees that you'd like to update or community goings on? Yes, Councilmember O'Doherty. Thank you.
I was hoping Councilor Gabriel didn't have to run out so he could give an update on the CAP. I know he has something going on tonight. If he's not here, I was going to give that update.
We'll give him a second. I think he's still with us, but I don't know if he had to excuse himself temporarily, which that's how it goes. Councilmember O'Doherty, I think it's
event.
Yeah, I think it's going to be
We had an event. So the big meeting tomorrow about the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan will be with the planning, both city and county planning and our environmental advisory commission, and those of us on the steering committee from both elected bodies would like our elected officials to just be listeners on those and not be trying to engage in the conversation, but rather just, hear what people are saying and know what Stantec is proposing, and just, if we could, I would ask you fellow counselors to not make it about us, but to make it about the presentation to those boards. So that's what I wanted to present about the Castle Rock Protection Plan, and then there'll be subsequent opportunities where we're more involved. Thank you.
Follow the process in an appropriate fashion. I agree. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thanks. And to add to that, tomorrow starts the public comment period, or this meeting is just basically information giving, right? And then our public can start making comments, and we will be provided information on how to make those comments. Am I understanding that right, Aaron?
Yes, that's my understanding. And there's also the county website has a form. Maybe I haven't found it on the city website yet, but it's probably there. Thanks.
Mayor?
Okay. Yes, City Clerk.
A city manager, if she's still with us, could maybe give you some updates on that. But I know she's been working with staff to create a web page on the city site as well. I'm not quite sure where we are, but it's going to be at cityoflaramie.org/CAP update, CAPP update.
Thank you. Okay. Other updates or comments about this? Or other items? Yes, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, so on a different subject, Planning Commission last night, Monday night, approved a variance for a parking area for the Pilot Hill project at the end of Willett. So it was an interesting conversation, and really excited to see that project is incrementally moving forward. So that's it for Planning Commission. They became Board of Adjustments and approved that variance. So and that's really it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. All right, Councilmember O'Doherty.
Yeah, Councilor Pierce filled in for me with Traffic Commission. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead with that. The Traffic Commission had a pretty interesting discussion on Cherry Loop Road, which is south of town, just off of south of I-80, just off of South 3rd Street or 287, regarding some solutions to basically a bit of a parking jam to some extent, and needing to have an appropriate speed limit, as well as no parking on that road, because the road was designed for no parking. So that was basically the extent of that discussion. So I suspect the city staff will be out there painting appropriately when yellow paint becomes available, and working on that project as well. So that was it for Traffic Commission. I was not I wasn't as prepared as I should have been by reading the notes ahead of time. So I was playing catch up, and thank city staff for catching me up after the fact. So I appreciate that. So thank you.
Anyone else with updates or comments? It doesn't look like it this evening, folks. All right. Well, seeing no further updates or comments, quick reminder, a special meeting on the 30th. And City Clerk, I don't believe we have agenda review this time because we don't have a pending agenda that's in need of review. Is that right?
That's correct, Mayor. Staff will be turning in gold sheets this Friday, so we won't have anything today.
And that's again because it's that 5th Tuesday type of month. And so
Right.
we've got the weird calendar. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for the time. Council members and staff, have a good rest of your evening. Thank you very, very much. Great work session. Lots to think about.
Night, everyone.
Good night.